Why don't you wait in the car, Maggie, until family photos are done? That is what my daughter-in-law said to me under the white garden arch, with roses behind her and my granddaughter's wedding music still floating through the air. She said it softly. That was Tessa's way. Never loud enough for everyone to hear. Never sharp enough that anyone could accuse her of being cruel. Just a gentle hand near my elbow, a careful smile, and words polished smooth enough to pass for kindness. "We're doing immediate family first," she added. "You understand." I stood there in my navy dress, the one I had pressed twice that morning because my hands were not as steady as they used to be. On my left shoulder was Paul's pearl brooch. My husband had given it to me years before, and I wore it only on days that mattered. That day mattered. My granddaughter Lily had just married a good young man beneath that arch. I had watched her walk down the aisle with tears in my eyes and one small hope in my heart. I wanted one photograph with her. Just one. Something I could put beside Paul's picture on the little table in my hallway. I looked past Tessa to my son, Brian. He had heard her. I know he had, because his eyes moved to mine for half a second. Then he looked down and straightened his tie, like the knot had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. That small silence did more damage than Tessa's words. The photographer stood nearby, adjusting his camera. Lily was laughing with her bridesmaids, unaware of what had just happened. Guests were drifting toward the reception hall. Everything around me looked beautiful, expensive, and carefully arranged. I almost walked away. For a moment, I truly did. I turned toward the parking lot, because old habits are hard to break. Mothers learn to swallow things. Grandmothers learn to keep peace. Widows learn to carry hurt quietly, especially when the day belongs to someone younger. Then my fingers touched Paul's brooch. I felt the cool pearl beneath my thumb, and I remembered why I had paid for that photographer in the first place. Not for Tessa's perfect image, not for Brian's convenience, for family, for memory, for the picture Paul never lived to see. So I stopped walking. I turned back, not quickly, not angrily, just steadily. I looked at the photographer and kept my voice low. Before I leave, I said, "Would you mind checking whose name is on your contract?" Tessa's smile changed, and the photographer looked down at his tablet. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. Those few seconds felt longer than the whole ceremony. Tessa kept her hand near my arm, but she was no longer touching me. Her smile stayed on her face, though it had tightened at the corners. Brian still would not look straight at me. He looked at the grass, then at Lily, then at the photographer, as if one of them might rescue him from having to be a son. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask Tessa how she could say such a thing. I did not ask Brian why he let her. There are moments when anger wants to climb right up your throat, but age teaches you something if you let it. Not every hurt deserves a public performance. Some hurts deserve a witness. The photographer cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am," he said carefully. "Margaret Whittaker is listed as the client for the Whittaker Family Legacy album. Final family selections go through her approval." Tessa gave a small laugh. It was too quick. "Oh, that's just paperwork," she said. "It's all family money." I looked at her then. Not hard, not cruel, just long enough for her to understand that I had heard every word. "No, Tessa," I said quietly. "It was Paul's money, and mine." The air changed. Not loudly, no one gasped, no one dropped a glass. The wedding did not stop. But the little circle around us went still in that way people do when truth has stepped into a place where pretending was more comfortable. Lily turned from her bridesmaids and called, "Grandma, are you coming?" That nearly broke me. 'Cause she sounded like a little girl again, waiting for me at the school curb with her backpack sliding off one shoulder. I smiled at her. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, "just one picture." Then I turned back to the photographer. "Before any more family photos are taken, I'd like one with my granddaughter." He nodded. Tessa said nothing. But that was not the moment I changed my mind. That had happened earlier, when I saw my name missing from something I had paid for. My name is Margaret Whitaker, though most folks call me Maggie. I was 72 years old that summer, retired from the front office of a public elementary school outside Dayton, Ohio. For 38 years, I answered phones, found lost lunchboxes, called parents when children had fevers, and kept track of paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. Permission slips, bus notes, emergency contacts, lunch accounts, field trip forms. I knew which children needed extra patience and which mothers were one bad phone call away from crying in the parking lot. I was never rich. Paul and I lived carefully. He ran a small appliance repair shop with a bell over the door and grease under his fingernails most evenings. I worked at the school. We paid our bills on time, drove our cars until they rattled, and saved a little from every paycheck, because Paul believed emergencies were less frightening when you had prepared for them. He also believed family should show up. Not just when it was easy, not just when there was something pretty to post or something expensive to celebrate. Paul showed up with a toolbox, a casserole dish, or a folding chair under his arm. If someone needed help, he did not make them beg for it. Brian was our only son. I loved that boy with the kind of love that makes a woman forget how tired she is. I packed his lunches, sat through ball games in cold wind, helped with college forms, and prayed over him more nights than he ever knew. Then Lily came along, and I learned there was a second kind of love waiting for me. I picked her up after school when Tessa went back to work. I kept apple slices in little plastic containers because she liked them better without the skin. I paid for tap shoes one spring when money was tight. I sat in the third row at every recital, clapping until my palms stung. I never kept a list because I wanted repayment. I did those things because that is what family meant to me. Paul used to say family photos were proof that love stood somewhere for a while. He said it every time I complained about him making us gather in front of the Christmas tree or on the porch. Before Easter dinner, "Come on, Maggie," he would say. "Someday we'll be glad we stopped long enough to remember." After he died 6 years before Lily's wedding, I still kept those photos dusted. But little by little, the people inside them began treating me like I belonged, only in the background. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. After Paul passed, people treated me carefully for a while. They brought soup, sat with me in the den, asked if I was sleeping. But grief has a way of making other people uncomfortable after a few months. Eventually, the visits got shorter. The calls became more practical. "Mum, can you pick Lily up today?" "Mum, do you have any extra grocery money until Friday?" "Mum, the electric bill came higher than we expected." I said yes, because saying yes felt like staying connected. It felt like keeping my place in the family after Paul was gone. Then the favors grew bigger. There was the month Brian's hours were cut, and I helped with the mortgage. There was the dental bill Tessa said could not wait. There were dance fees for Lily, a car repair, a new refrigerator, and more than one temporary loan that never found its way back to me. Tessa was always polite about it. That was what made it hard to name. She never snatched. She never demanded in a way I could point to. She would sigh softly and say, "Maggie, I hate even asking." Then explain why it was really for Lily, or for the house, or for keeping stress off Brian. And I would write the check. But when there was a dinner where nothing was needed from me, the invitation came late, if it came at all. At Thanksgiving, I was asked to bring 2 pies and extra folding chairs, then seated near the hallway because Tessa said the dining room was already balanced. At Lily's birthday, I paid for the cake and watched Tessa thank her friends for helping make the day special. Brian saw these things. I know he did. Once, after Tessa corrected me in front of guests for putting serving spoons in the wrong bowls, I found him in the garage and said, "That embarrassed me. He rubbed his forehead and said, "Mom, you know how Tessa gets. Just don't take it personally." But how does a mother not take it personally when her own son asks her to shrink so his house can stay peaceful? I did not know then that every little silence was teaching them how much I would accept. Then Lily got engaged, and Paul's old envelope came back into my hands. I found it in the bottom drawer of Paul's old dresser, the one that still stuck a little on the left side. Lily had called that afternoon, breathless and laughing, to tell me she was engaged. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. After we hung up, I stayed there for a long while, looking at the empty chair across from me. Paul should have heard that news. That was the thought that made me get up and open his drawer. I do not know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe a handkerchief. Maybe his old watch. Maybe just something that still felt like him. Under a stack of folded undershirts I had never been able to give away, I found a small cream envelope. His handwriting was on the front. Lily's wedding picture. I sat down right there on the edge of the bed. Inside was not much money. A few 20s, 2 50s, and a note folded once. Paul had written, "For the day our girl stands in white, make sure we get one picture with all of us." I pressed that note against my chest. Paul loved photographs more than I did. He was always the one saying, "Come on, Maggie, just one more." He wanted proof that love had gathered in one place, even if only for a minute. And when Lily was little, he used to say, "One day, I want 3 generations in a frame. You, me, Brian, and our girl." He never got that day. So I added to that envelope. Not all at once, a little from savings, a little from money I had set aside for new porch furniture, a little from the account Paul and I had built by living carefully when other people thought we were just plain. And I made one decision that felt right at the time. I would help pay for Lily's wedding photographs. Not for show, not for control. For Paul. When I called the photographer, I asked about a special album. He called it a family legacy package. I remember thinking Paul would have liked that name. For the wedding, I took out his mother's pearl brooch and pinned it to my dress. I thought I was carrying Paul with me. I did not yet understand that Tessa was already deciding which parts of our family were worth showing. At first, Tessa sounded grateful. "Maggie, that is so generous," she said, when I told her I wanted to help with the photographs and part of the reception. "Really, you don't have to do that." But I had known Tessa long enough to hear the difference between refusing help and waiting for someone to insist. So I said, "It would mean a lot to me, and to Paul." There was a short pause on the phone. Then her voice brightened. "Well, if you're sure, I can send you a few things." A few things turned into more than a few. First came the photographer's deposit. I paid that directly because the contract needed a name, address, and signature. Mine went on all 3. Then came the venue deposit. Then a catering estimate. Then an email about flowers that Tessa said were just a little above budget, but worth it for the pictures. She liked using that phrase. For the pictures. I did not object at first. Lily was our only granddaughter, and I wanted her day to be beautiful. I told myself weddings were stressful, that mothers of brides sometimes got carried away, that Tessa was only trying to give her daughter something special. But slowly, I began noticing what was missing. When the invitation proof came, it said, "Together with their families, Brian and Tessa Whitaker invite you." My name was nowhere on it. Paul's name was nowhere on it. I called Brian that evening and asked, gently, "Would it be strange to mention your father somehow, since some of the wedding money came from what he saved?" Brian sighed, like I had handed him a heavy box. "Mom, don't make the money part awkward," he said. "Tessa's handling all that." All that. 2 words that covered 1,000 little dismissals. After that, Tessa stopped copying me on full planning emails. Instead, she forwarded invoices with short notes. Can you take care of this one? This is due Friday. Vendor needs payment today. No hello sometimes. No thank you until after the receipt was sent. Then I noticed upgrades I had not approved. Extra centerpieces, a dessert table, more hours for the photographer, a larger print package. Tessa called them small adjustments. But small adjustments have a way of becoming large bills when someone else is expected to pay them. So I did what I had done for nearly 40 years in a school office. I made a folder. I printed every email. I saved every invoice. I kept the photographer's contract, the venue receipt, the catering estimate, and the notes where Tessa had asked for money without ever saying, Maggie is helping host this. I was not planning a fight. I was just keeping things straight. What they did not know was that I had spent 40 years keeping records for a living. By the time the wedding day arrived, I had a neat blue folder on my kitchen desk and a small ache in my chest. I kept trying to ignore. That morning, I told myself to leave the ache at home. I got dressed slowly. I wore the navy dress Paul always said. Made my eyes look brighter, though I never believed him when he said it. I pinned his mother's pearl brooch to my left shoulder and smoothed the fabric around it twice. Then I tucked my old wedding handkerchief into my purse, the one with a tiny blue flower stitched in the corner. I arrived early because that is what I do. I have never liked making people wait. The venue was lovely, with white chairs on the lawn and flowers wrapped around the garden arch. Lily looked beautiful. When I saw her in her dress, I forgot every uncomfortable thing for a minute. She was still my little girl, with apple slices in her lunch bag. Grandma, she whispered, hugging me carefully so she would not wrinkle anything. You look so pretty. That one sentence carried me for a while. Then the little cuts began. An usher checked the seating chart and led me to a chair several rows behind Brian and Tessa, off to the side, near a tall planter. I looked toward the front row and saw Tessa's sister, two of her friends, and a couple I barely knew, sitting where close family usually sits. I told myself not to make a fuss. Then I opened the program. On the second page, printed in soft gold letters, it said, Hosted with love by Brian and Tessa Whitaker. I read it once. Then again. My name was not there. Paul's name was not there. Not even a small mention. Not even in loving memory. The money he had tucked away in that cream envelope had helped put flowers on that arch, food on those tables, and a photographer by the aisle. But on paper, we had disappeared. A woman behind me leaned toward Tessa before the ceremony and said, You and Brian did all this? How generous. Tessa smiled like she had been waiting for that line all morning. We wanted Lily to have the day she deserved, she said. Brian glanced at me, just once. Then he looked away. The program hurt, the seat hurt. But the real insult came after the ceremony, when everyone gathered near the garden arch for family photos. I stood a few steps back with my purse held in both hands. I did not push forward. I did not ask where to stand. I waited the way. Older women are often expected to wait, quietly and politely, trusting someone would remember we were there. The photographer began calling groups. Bride and groom with parents. Brian and Tessa stepped in close. Lily's new in-laws stood on the other side. Everyone smiled. The camera clicked. Tessa adjusted Lily's veil, then turned her face slightly toward the sun, like she had practiced the moment in her mirror. Then came siblings, cousins, college friends, bridesmaids, Tessa's sister, Tessa's parents. People moved in and out of the frame, while I stood beside a white chair with my hand resting on Paul's brooch. I told myself, they will call me in a minute. Then I heard Tessa speak to one of her relatives behind the photographer. We just want the main photos clean, she said, not too crowded. She did not say my name, but I felt it anyway. A moment later, she came toward me with that same careful smile. The kind people use when they want their cruelty to look like organization. Maggie, she said softly, why don't you wait in the car until family photos are done? We're keeping these to immediate family first. For a second, I could not feel my feet. I looked at Brian. That is the part I remember most clearly. Not the flowers, not the music, not even Tessa's words. I remember my son standing there in his grey suit, close enough to hear every syllable and doing nothing. His eyes met mine, then dropped. He straightened his tie. That was his answer. Something inside me went very still. Not cold, not angry in the loud way. Just still, the way a house feels after a door has closed for the last time. I nodded once and turned toward the parking lot. I had almost reached my car when I saw myself in the window. An old woman in a navy dress, holding a purse too tightly, wearing a pearl brooch from a man who had loved her better than that. And I heard Paul's voice in my memory. Just one picture, Maggie, so they remember we were there. That was when I stopped waiting to be chosen. I turned around and walked back toward the photographer. My steps were slow, but they were steady. Tessa saw me coming first. Her mouth tightened, and Brian looked at me the way he used to look when he was a boy, and knew he had broken something, but hoped I had not noticed. I did not speak to either one of them. I went straight to the photographer, a young man with kind eyes and a black camera strap across his shirt. He looked uncertain. Poor thing. Weddings already have enough tension without an old grandmother walking back from the parking lot. Excuse me, I said. Would you please check the name on the photography contract? Tessa gave a small laugh behind me. Maggie, this really isn't necessary. I kept my eyes on the photographer. He tapped his tablet a few times, then looked at me more carefully. Yes, ma'am, he said. The contract is under Margaret Whittaker. You're listed as the client for the Whittaker Family Legacy album and Final Family Selections. The breeze moved through the flowers on the arch, and for the first time all day, Tessa had nothing ready to say. Then she tried. Well, she said lightly, it's all family money anyway. I turned to her then. No, Tessa, I said. It was Paul's money, and mine. I did not say it loudly. I did not need to. The truth does not have to shout when it has paperwork behind it. Lily stepped closer, her smile fading. Grandma, what's wrong? I looked at her in that white dress, still glowing from happiness, and I could not let Tessa's choices stain the whole day for her. Nothing that needs to touch your smile right now, I told her. Then I turned back to the photographer. I would like one picture with my granddaughter, please, and one with Brian, Lily, and me. Brian's face changed at the sound of his name. Shame finally found him, but it had arrived too late to defend me. The photographer nodded. Of course, Mrs. Whittaker. They thought the photo was the issue. It wasn't. The photo only showed me what had to change. The reception went on as if nothing had happened, because that is what weddings do. Music plays, people eat, glasses clink. Someone's feelings can be breaking quietly in the corner, and the cake still gets cut on schedule. I sat at my table with a linen napkin across my lap, and Paul's brooch pinned to my shoulder. The seat they had given me was not terrible, not exactly. It was near enough to see the head table, but far enough to understand I had not been placed there by accident. Tessa did not look at me through most of dinner. Brian tried to act normal. He came by once with a stiff smile and asked if the chicken was all right, as if we were strangers at a banquet. I told him it was fine. That seemed to relieve him more than it should have. Lily came over later and kissed my cheek. I'm glad we got our picture, Grandma. So am I, sweetheart, I said. She studied my face for a second, like she could feel something under the words, but then one of her bridesmaids called her back to the dance floor. I watched her go, young and happy, her dress catching the light. I was glad she was happy. Truly, I was. That was the hardest part. You can be wounded and still want joy for the person you love. When the music slowed, I imagined Paul beside me. he would have tapped my hand and said, "Come on, Maggie. One dance won't kill us." He had 2 left feet, and no shame about it. I smiled at the memory, then looked around the room and realized how close I had come to paying for a family memory that had no room for either of us. Near the restrooms, Tessa finally caught me alone. "You embarrassed us," she said under her breath. I looked at her carefully. I asked for a photograph. "You made it about money." "No," I said. "You did that when you accepted it and hid me." Her cheeks flushed, but before she could answer, Brian appeared behind her. "Mom," he said, tired already, "couldn't you have let it go for one day?" There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have spoken up." He wanted me to protect the day, not my dignity. I went home that night with my purse, my brooch, and a quiet decision sitting heavy in my chest. Before I even changed out of my dress, I opened Paul's old envelope again. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lamp on low, the house quiet around me, and that cream envelope resting in my lap. My feet hurt from dress shoes. My eyes burned from holding too much in for too many hours. I unpinned Paul's pearl brooch and laid it beside the envelope, like he was sitting there with me. Then I cried. Not loudly. Not the kind of crying that shakes walls or begs someone to come running. Just tired tears, the kind that finally fall when a woman stops making excuses for everybody else. I cried because my son had looked away. I cried because Paul's little note had been carried into a day where his name was not even printed. And I cried because I finally understood that love had made me generous, but grief had made me too easy to use. After a while, I wiped my face, changed into my robe, and went to the kitchen. The blue folder was still on my desk. I opened it and spread everything out under the yellow light. The photographer's contract, the venue deposit, the catering estimate, the emails from Tessa, the list of upgrades I had never approved, and the wedding program with Brian and Tessa's names printed as hosts. I did not do anything dramatic that night. I did not call anyone. I did not send angry messages. I just put the papers in order and placed Paul's envelope on top. By Monday morning, I knew what had to be done. My attorney, Helen Reeves, had already been scheduled to meet with me that week about updating my estate documents. At first, I had planned to make things easier for Brian. I had thought of giving him and Tessa some control over money meant for Lily's future, because I believed family could be trusted to handle family matters. I no longer believed that. When I sat across from Helen in her office, she listened without interrupting. That was one thing I had always liked about her. She did not rush older women through their own lives. Finally, she said, "Maggie, Lily can still be protected without giving Brian and Tessa control." That sentence settled something in me. She explained an independent trustee, written conditions, education support, emergency help, and future housing assistance that could go directly to Lily. Nothing cruel, nothing reckless, just careful. After I left Helen's office, I called the photographer and asked for written confirmation of my gallery rights and album approval. Then I requested a clean invoice review, separating what I had approved from what Tessa had added. They thought I had gone quiet. I had only gone careful. The first call came before I even made coffee on Tuesday morning. I was standing at the counter, spooning grounds into the filter, when my phone rang and Tessa's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Maggie," she said, bright in that tight way of hers, "I need you to tell the photographer to send me the full gallery link. I'm trying to choose pictures for thank you cards, and Lily wants to post a few." I poured water into the machine and watched it settle. "The photographer has the contract," I said. "He'll release the gallery according to that." There was a pause. "Well, yes, but I'm Lily's mother. And I'm the client listed on the contract." Her voice lowered. "Are you really going to be difficult about wedding pictures?" "No," I said. "I'm going to be accurate." That was the first time I heard real irritation slip through her polish. A few hours later, Brian called. He tried to sound gentle, which somehow hurt more than if he had simply been honest. "Mom," he said, "this is getting out of hand." I looked at the blue folder sitting on my kitchen table. "What is?" "All of it. The photographer, the invoices." Tessa's upset. "I imagine she is." He sighed. "Can't we just move on?" That phrase had followed me for years. Move on meant swallow it. Move on meant make it easier for everybody else. Move on meant don't ask anyone to face what they did. Before I could answer, another email came in from the caterer. It was the final invoice, and it included charges I had never approved. Premium desserts, extra late-night snacks, additional floral pieces for the dessert table. All things Tessa had added after telling me the budget was basically settled. So I did what Helen had advised me to do. I paid the approved balance. Then I sent the rest back with copies of Tessa's authorization emails attached and a short note saying those charges had not been approved by me. No anger, no accusations, just records. By late afternoon, Brian was at my front door. He stood in my kitchen looking tired, with one hand on the back of a chair he did not sit in. "Mum, Lily shouldn't suffer because adults had a misunderstanding." I folded my hands on the table. "Lily will not suffer." "You don't know that." "Yes," I said. "I do. That is exactly why the trust is being protected." His face changed then. Just a little. But enough. He had come over about photographs and invoices. He was beginning to understand this was about much more than that. Brian called Tessa from my driveway. I saw him through the kitchen window, pacing beside his car, with the phone pressed hard against his ear. 20 minutes later, she pulled in behind him, still dressed nicely, still carrying herself like the person most inconvenienced by everybody else's feelings. She came into my kitchen without sitting down. "Maggie," she said, "this has gone far enough. You made Lily's wedding about money." I looked at her, then at my son. "No, I made it about truth." Brian rubbed his face. "Mom," everyone was stressed. "Weddings bring out the worst in people. Can't we just admit some things were said badly?" Some things. That is how families bury hurt. They take a specific wound and cover it with soft little words until nobody has to look at it clearly. I opened the blue folder on the table. First, I laid down the wedding program. Brian and Tessa's names were printed there as hosts. Then the photography contract with my signature. Then the invoice list, with check marks beside the charges I had approved. Last, I placed Paul's cream envelope on top of everything. Tessa's eyes flicked to it. "What is that?" "Your father-in-law's wish," I said. "Not that either of you asked." The room went quiet. I turned to Brian. My voice stayed calm, though my hands were cold in my lap. "When your wife told me to wait in the car," I asked, "why did you say nothing?" His mouth opened a little. No answer came. Tessa stepped in quickly. "That is not fair." Brian was trying to keep the day peaceful. I looked at her. "Peaceful for whom?" She blinked. "I did not ask for a speech," I said. "I did not ask to be thanked in front of guests. I asked to stand in one picture at a wedding I helped pay for, wearing a brooch from the man whose savings helped make it happen." Brian sat down then, slowly. "This was never about one photo," I said. "It was about years of taking my help while hiding my presence." And then I told them what had changed. I did not say it with satisfaction. That would be the wrong word. There is no joy in realizing you have to protect yourself from people you once trusted without question. I looked at Brian first, because he was my son. "Lily's future support is still there," I said. "I am not taking that away from her." His shoulders lowered a little, as if he had been holding his breath. "But you and Tessa will not control it." Tessa's head came up. "What does that mean?" "It means Helen Reeves is preparing a protected trust. An independent trustee will handle it." If Lily needs help with education, medical emergencies, or a down payment someday, the money can go directly where it is supposed to go, not through either of you. Tessa stared at me like I had slapped her. You're punishing us, she said. No, I answered. Punishment takes something away to hurt you. Boundaries keep me from being hurt again. Brian looked at the papers on the table. For once, he did not rush to defend Tessa. He just sat there, quiet and pale, reading the truth in black ink. I continued. I will no longer cover expenses I did not approve. I will no longer write checks because someone waited until the last minute. I will no longer be treated like a silent backup account. Tessa folded her arms. After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. What you did, I said gently, was let me pay for a family memory and then ask me to sit in the car while it was made. Brian closed his eyes. That was when I knew he finally understood. I had not cut off love. I had cut off access. There is a difference, though some people only learn it when the door is already closed. I gathered Paul's envelope and slid it back toward me. There was one more thing I intended to keep. Not the money. Not control. A picture. It arrived 3 weeks later in a flat white envelope with the photographer's return address printed neatly in the corner. I knew what it was before I opened it. Still, I made myself a cup of tea first and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sorted invoices, signed papers, and finally told the truth. The photograph was wrapped in tissue. When I lifted it out, my hand went still. There I was under the garden arch, standing beside Lily. She was in her wedding dress, bright and young, her hand wrapped around my arm. I was wearing my navy dress and Paul's pearl brooch. The sunlight had caught the brooch just enough to make it glow. I did not look powerful in that picture. I looked present, and that was enough. A few days later, Lily came by alone. She stood on my porch with a small paper bag from the bakery and eyes that looked older than they had on her wedding day. "Grandma," she said, "I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening." I let her in. We sat at the table, and I poured coffee the way I had since she was old enough to ask for more cream than coffee. "You were the bride, sweetheart," I told her. "But now you know, and knowing matters." She cried a little. I did not make her carry what belonged to her parents, but I also did not pretend nothing had happened. Love does not require lying. Brian still calls. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I let it wait until I feel ready. Tessa has stayed distant, which is its own kind of answer. The trust is being handled properly now, and Lily will be protected, without anyone using her as a reason to reach into my pocket. As for the photograph, I put it in a silver frame and placed it on the hallway table beside Paul's wedding picture. His young face smiles out from one frame. Lily and I stand together in the other. Sometimes, when the afternoon light comes through the window, both pictures shine at once. I wish the lesson had come softer. I wish my son had spoken sooner. But I am no longer waiting in anyone's car for permission to belong. Being quiet was never the same as being erased. Have you ever had to protect your peace after being treated like you did not matter?